Hello, my friend. Joshua Johnson speaking. It is great to be with you on this Friday, April 1st. And tonight, we're answering more of your questions on the war in Ukraine. A major evacuation attempt in southern Ukraine has failed. Thousands are trapped without much food or water. Meanwhile, Russian officials claim that Ukrainian helicopters attacked Russia. We'll have the latest. Women have been on the front lines in Ukraine defending their country from Russia for years. You'll meet the leader of an all-women's battalion just ahead. And former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul joins our panel to answer your questions next. Also tonight, we now have a complete map of the human genetic code. What did we learn, and what can we do now? The researcher who led that work on the human genome joins us later. Plus, marijuana is one step closer to being legal in the U.S. The House passed a decriminalization bill. What will the Senate do? And Will Smith just announced his plans to make amends after the Oscars, and that includes a big change to his standing in the Academy. So which way is the war in Ukraine going right now? We might be in for a long war of attrition, but it's hard to say. It is possible that Russia lacked the capacity to do what it apparently set out to do, carry out a series of quick, straightforward attacks on several fronts. And the Ukrainian military may have taken notice of that. Today, Russia says that Ukrainian forces entered Russian airspace and fired at an oil depot in the city of Belgorod. That's about 20 miles from the border. Ukrainian officials have denied the attack, and NBC News cannot independently confirm the claim. Meanwhile, an attempted mass evacuation collapsed today in the port city of Mariopol. Russia said that it would allow a humanitarian corridor out of the city, but only a few thousand people made it out. The Red Cross says it tried to evacuate more people and deliver aid to Mariupol. It eventually turned back, saying the conditions made it impossible to proceed. And peace talks between the two sides resumed today. The Kremlin says today's attack on that Russian oil depot risks undermining this week's progress. Let's begin with NBC's Ali Arouzi joining us from western Ukraine in the city of Lviv, near the border with Poland. Ali, what more do we know about the status of both evacuations and of that claim that the Russians made that the Ukrainians have actively attacked?
Hi, Joshua. Well, the evacuation in Mariupol continues to be a disaster. The Red Cross was meant to go in today with a convoy of buses to get people out. They were meant to take humanitarian aid in as well. None of that happened. The Russians blocked them from going in again. This isn't the first time we've seen it happen, time and time again. And what's unbelievable about it, Joshua, is that the Russians specifically told the Red Cross that they are not allowed to take humanitarian aid into Mariupol, nor were they able to take any food in there. And as you well know, that place has been starved off. They don't have any food, running water, electricity, gas. I mean, the humanitarian crisis there is a disaster. The Red Cross have been saying that tens of thousands of people's lives are at risk in Mariupol if they don't get much needed aid, but they didn't let them have it. On a good point, a few thousand people possibly got out today in private cars. They just got into their cars. They risked the Russian border controls there, and they got out safely from all accounts. But the humanitarian aid didn't get in, and they didn't let that convoy of buses go in to get people out. So a disaster there. With the helicopters, that's actually pretty interesting. The Ukrainians haven't denied it or confirmed that they attacked that Russian oil depot, but if they did indeed, it would be the first time in this war that the Ukrainians have crossed the border into Russian airspace and conducted an attack. And the attack was very daring. It was done in the early hours of the morning under the cover of darkness. Apparently the helicopters flew at very low altitude, just meters above tree level, conducted an attack and came back. And that's pretty dangerous because it's all done in dark. darkness. So when they're doing the attack or coming back from the attack, they could hit an object. It doesn't seem as though they have, and that's a big morale boost for the Ukrainians. And also it does some damage to much needed supplies for the Russians that are bringing fuel to their troops in the country, as the Russians have also hit fuel depots here in Ukraine over the course of this war.
I think we should be humble in terms of the way, Ali, and you've been very careful with this, the way that we talk about kind of which way this war is going, right? Because we heard this report from Russia about the attack across the border on the oil depot. Earlier today, we heard from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine that tweeted about Russian occupiers leaving the Chernobyl nuclear power plant caused by army and radiation exposure. They even made a gamer reference in the tweet and said that Russian mutants lost this round of @Stalker_the game. Stalker is a first-person shooter game that takes place in Chernobyl that is made by a Ukrainian video game studio. And then earlier today, President Biden commented on the status of Russian forces in Ukraine. Here's part of what the president said.
There is no clear evidence that he's pulling all of his forces out of Kiev. There is also evidence that he is beefing up his troops down in the Donbass area. Depending on your view of Putin, I'm a little skeptical. It's an open question whether he's actually pulling back.
And Ali, you mentioned the other night that U.S. intelligence has been pretty accurate on this, so I presume that the Western skepticism is also pretty well founded, even though the picture of exactly what's going on the ground is a bit opaque.
That's absolutely right. Look, the intelligence has been correct. From everything we're learning, there's only been a very small withdrawal of troops around the Kyiv area to go to fight in the Donbass area. And, we had a chance to speak to the mayor of Cherniv today, and he's confirmed everything that's being saying. Cherniv continues to be pounded by the Russians. That's also a humanitarian disaster, much like Mariopol. The Russians have blown up bridges into Cherniv. They've closed the roads off into Cherniv. Nobody can get in there. They can't get humanitarian aid into Cherniv. So that's also a disaster in the making. But, the mayor was very tough. He said, we're going to fight till the last man here. We're not going to let the Russians take this place. If they are going to take this place, they have to kill us all in the city. And, Roger, tragically, I asked him, is this just the beginning of the pounding of Cherniv? And he said, yeah, I think this is just the beginning, and the worst is still to come. So another huge disaster opening up in Cherniv.
Hey, one more real quick question, Ali. We also got a statement from the State Department spokesman, Ned Price, about a special monitoring mission to Ukraine by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, that the Russian Federation blocked consensus to extend its mandate. Briefly, Ali, this sounds like the State Department is accusing Russia of using this leverage to reduce some of the international scrutiny of what's happening on the ground.
Absolutely. Everything the Russians have been saying, the opposite has been happening here on the ground. And of course, those kind of operations are essential to gathering information on war crimes, on how they've hit civilian areas. And the Russians also want to deflect from that. If people aren't going in there documenting what's happened, it's harder to bring a case in tribunals and international courts.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ali. Much appreciated. That's NBC's Ali Arousi starting us off tonight from Lviv, Ukraine. Time now to answer more of your questions on the war in Ukraine. Joining us now tonight are NBC News national security and international affairs analyst Michael McFaul. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And U.S. Army retired Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, the former deputy commander of U.S. European Command. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both with us, and let's begin with a question from Dave asking about that very thing that we were talking about earlier, which is Russia potentially attacking, Ukraine attacking on Russian territory. Dave asks, has Ukraine fired any missiles into Russian territory, and if not, why not? General Twitty, I wonder if I might start with you. I don't know that we know if Ukraine has fired directly on Russia. I think the answer is no, but what do you think?
Yeah, so we don't know. And what I will tell you, we don't know whether or not they conducted this attack last night or early this morning. What I will tell you is that Russia and Ukraine, they have a pretty porous border. and the helicopters that were used, they were flying pretty low, so they evaded Russian airspace if they did so, their air defense systems. And so this was a pretty skillful attack if they did so. The other thing is the Ukrainians, a large part of them have Russian passports. And you could expect to see something happen like this deep in Russia in the future if this war continues.
General, before we keep going with audience questions, what would the strategic value of something like this be for Ukraine? I mean, they've got enough to worry about trying to defend their own territory. Does going on the offense intentionally behoove Ukraine?
Absolutely. So if you look at the ground forces of Russia right now, they are defeated. They're on their heels. And the more pressure you can put on Russia, not only in Ukraine, but also attack their homeland, the better, in order to either stop this war or continue the attack and keep Russian forces on their heels.
Ambassador, let me get to a question from Amanda about supplying the Ukrainians with weapons. We should note a lot of Western countries have been supplying Ukraine with a lot of weapons and ammunition and vests and gear and all kinds of other things. But Amanda asked, concerning the MiGs that Ukraine is requesting, why can't Poland sell them to Ukraine? Better yet, extend them credit. Ukraine is allowed to purchase weapons for defense. Ambassador, I know that Western nations have come up with a variety of different ways to fund war efforts. FDR had his effort in World War II, but what are the diplomatic issues around selling big weapons like jets, like MiGs to the Ukrainians?
Well, from what I understand, they were willing to give those MiGs, the MiG-29s. They had 25, 26, 27 of them. By the way, there's 70 of them altogether in the NATO alliance, from what I understand. They were prepared to give them on two conditions. One is that the Americans transferred them, or they brought Ukrainian pilots to Germany to fly them into Ukraine. And two, that we would replenish what they gave with our own fighter jets, F-16s. So it wasn't a question of money. It was a question of who was going to actually transfer them. And again, from what I understand, talking to U.S. government officials, Ukrainian government officials, the Biden administration decided that they did not want to make that transfer. One, they cited that their intelligence that they had obtained, that Putin would see this as an escalatory move. I'm just reporting. I don't know exactly how, what could be more escalatory than what they're doing inside Ukraine already, but that's one thing the Biden administration said. And two, what I've heard from talking to senior Pentagon officials is that these MiG-29s are fighter jets designed to fight other jets, and that there's not a lot of that happening right now. And so they made the determination that this was not an essential weapon. But that's not the Ukrainian government's position. I want to be clear. I personally talked to Zelensky about this a couple weeks ago, and other Ukrainian officials. They say that they want these weapons. They need these weapons. And, that's where this has been at a standstill ever since.
Let's continue with a question from Ben about NATO membership. We've got 1,000 good questions about NATO, but here is the one that Ben left in our inbox.
How come NATO cannot simply take a vote and provide Ukraine with a probationary or temporary or emergency membership in response to the Russian invasion?
Ben, thank you for that question. General, what would you say to Ben about that?
So first of all, there's no such thing as a probationary emergency. They have to be invited into NATO, and the NATO Atlantic Council must vote on their accession into NATO. And so if they're invited, they come in. Ukraine was under something called the Membership Partnership Program, where they were actually being assessed, and they were being trained, supported by NATO, but not really in NATO yet. And so they were moving forward to be a part of NATO, but that vote has not happened yet. And so we are where we are, and that's why they're not part of NATO.
Ambassador, we got a lot of questions about Russia. I'm going to ask the control room to go to question 6, because this one came in by email addressed to you specifically, and it's an interesting question about Vladimir Putin and the support that's around him. As soon as I read it, I was like, this is a good one. I want to hear what the ambassador has to say. Alan emailed, the Putin cult is based in a deeply cynical, older population that has been repeatedly traumatized. The last time was when the Soviet Union fell apart and depression descended in the 1990s. Are his younger supporters part of this cult? Alan, that's a very interesting question, particularly, Ambassador, because we've talked about this cult of personality around Vladimir Putin, but I'm not sure I have a clear picture of who's in the cult and how far it extends.
Well, I want to be clear, neither do I, and nobody does. And I think that's an important thing we need to start with. I'm going to answer the question, but I'm putting caveats around it because we don't have good public opinion polling in Russia today. It's a dictatorship. People have no incentive whatsoever to answer a pollster's question honestly, right? I mean, think about that. If you're sitting out there in Vladivostok and somebody calls you up and says, hey, Volodya, I work for a pollster company here in Moscow. Tell me, do you support Putin or not? You have only one. There's only one right answer to that question. You say yes, no matter what you think, because you don't know who the pollster is, and most of the polling companies, except for one, are completely controlled by the Kremlin. So we need to be careful in reading the data that we have. But here's a rule of thumb I think is fair to say: the older you are, the more rural place you live, the less educated you are, the more likely you are to support Vladimir Putin and listen to his propaganda channels. We have pretty good data to show that. And likewise, to answer the question specifically, the younger you are, the more urban you are, the more educated you are, and the richer you are. I left that one out. That's the fourth one, rich or poor, the more likely you are not a supporter of Putin, and you are not watching his propaganda channels. And think of those demographics. Those have been pretty consistent for a long time. And that creates a problem, I think, for Vladimir Putin over the long term. It's one thing to have the people in the countryside and the elderly supporting you, but if you're losing the talented people in the cities, that is a long-term problem for any leader around the world, including Vladimir Putin.
General Twitty, let's continue with Russia, and I'm going to ask for question 5 from the control room, because we've got a lot of questions about what we could do about Russia and what the options were, and would we be in this situation if X had happened instead of Y. Salvador commented, maybe General George Patton had it right. Russia might have been a democracy today if we had fought them after fighting Germany in 1944. As much as I enjoy the reference to one of my favorite war movies with George C. Scott as General Patton, and I'm hearing his voice in my head, I'm not sure that there's anything that could have been done necessarily to either prevent this eventuality from occurring, considering that Vladimir Putin's view of Russia is a very old, long-standing hagiographic view that goes back centuries into Russia's history as an empire, or whether or not that tells us anything going forward. But it's an interesting theory that Salvador posits. General, what do you think?
Well, I'm not so sure about that theory. Let's go back to World War II. It was the Soviets that were vital to us winning World War II on the eastern flank against fighting the Nazis. And so we held the West as part of the alliance, and it was the Soviets that came through on the eastern side, fought the Nazis, and was victorious against the Nazis on the eastern flank. And so I'll give the Russians that. They were vital to the success of winning the war, World War II. And so that's why I say, not so sure 1944 would have been the appropriate time to fight the Russians.
Ambassador, let me get to one more question, and I'm going to ask the control room for question 7, if we could, from Robin, about another nation that is giving Western nations a lot to think about, and that is China. Robin asked, could this be an opportunity to restructure our ongoing tumultuous relationship with China? Ambassador, China has been trying to sort of, at least earlier in this conflict, play the grown-up in the room like, guys, let's calm down, let's figure this out, let's keep everything neutral, let's get back to normal. It voted either against or abstaining with some of the UN resolutions related to the war in Ukraine. and it's got its own drama going on with Taiwan. So I'm not sure what China means to all of this.
Well, I would characterize our policy so far. I think the question's a great question. I think there's a great opportunity for Xi Jinping to play a leadership role, but I don't expect it. And let me explain that, which is right now they have a kind of have your cake and eat it too policy. They say on the one hand that they're for the international rules of the game, they're for the United Nations system, and that system says we don't preemptively invade our neighbors, we don't annex the territory of our neighbors. That's, after all, what started World War II, and that thou shalt not annex territory of thy neighbor. That's one of the rules that we had even during the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were not annexing territory of our neighbors. Putin has violated that, and Xi Jinping, instead of criticizing it, as you rightly said, they were neutral, they abstained. And I think he should make a play to say, we want to be a constructive partner in that international system, and our former ally here, our former partner, is violating those rules. And he should condemn that. And I think that would create an opportunity to restructure our bilateral relationship with China. I just see no evidence that Xi Jinping is taking that opportunity. And that, I think, is a real shame. I think it is a genuine opportunity for him to change the bilateral relationship, to make China look like a respectable nation in the international system. And he's choosing not to do so, at least so far.
We appreciate both of you coming on to answer some more of our audience's great questions. Thank you both very much. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Steph Twitty. Gentlemen, much appreciated. Thank you both. Coming up, most of the people fleeing Ukraine are women and children, but some of the women are choosing to stay and joining the fight. We'll introduce you to one of their leaders. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. The women of Ukraine have played a key political role for years now, and that role has evolved with this war. Back in 2013, anti-government protesters gathered in Kyiv. They called it Euromaidan, or the Maidan Uprising. These protests led to the 2014 Revolution of Dignity. That ousted Ukraine's former president, Viktor Yanukovych. Out of that came a group called the 39th Maidan Women's Self-Defense 100. And they have been fighting against Russian invasions ever since. Joining us now is the group's founder, Anna Kovalenko. She is a former member both of Ukraine's parliament and of President Zelensky's administration. Ms. Kovalenko, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for making time for us. Can you explain to us a little bit more about what this group does? I understand it came out of a time of protest, but now that we're at a time of war, what are some of the things that your group is involved in?
Probably some of our girls joined to our armed forces. Some of them work like volunteers and try to help get some homeless, 24 hours in connection with our military forces, try to collect the information about enemy and give to Ukrainian army, provide to Ukrainian army. We work with different NGO, help them communicate with the Ukrainian authorities. We have these horizontal communications with another international NGOs and explain them what real needs today Ukrainians army. We probably very active and inspired.
Tell me about the women who are part of this group. Do they come from lots of different walks of life? Are they mostly from military backgrounds? What are they like?
Since Maidan, it was like women from 16 years old to 80 years old. It's with a different experience, different politician view. Actually, a lot of them, some of them, another member of parliament, some of them military or volunteer. It's doesn't matter. All of these women just want to live in a better country and provide their experience for that. Probably it's not like regarding me personally, either the members of my organization, Ukrainians, work to defend like our country.
You said in an interview once that when women are in battalions, the men will not run away. What did you mean by that? What do you think is the impact of having women involved in these kind of like paramilitary activities?
I think that's, in Ukraine, okay, if we're talking like women in Ukrainian army, probably since the war started in 2014, the number of women in the Ukrainian army has become almost 30%. And when I was an advisor to the Minister of Defense, I, together with the other NGOs, we worked on with the general staff and the Minister of Defense on regulatory documents in order to lift the ban of women from holding combat position in the armed forces of Ukraine. My friend, for example, she's female, in effect, on the front line in 2014-15 was a platoon commander. Nevertheless, according to the documents, she was the best attendant. And today, the situation is completely different. Quite a lot of women are in a combat position. We have only 4 generals among women, 2 generals in the security service, 1 from the Minister of Internal Affairs, and 1 of the current combat of the medical forces. Over time, I'm sure there will be more. Thus, in these 8 years, a number of women has been killed in the war. And if we talk about paramilitary or women who wants just like support like volunteer, these are huge numbers. And it's not depend with the age or something like this.
Yeah. I wonder what your sense is of how the war is going, particularly for the women of your organization on the ground. Russia said today that Ukrainian helicopters carried out an airstrike on Russian territory, not very deep into Russia from Ukraine. And NBC News has not verified this independently, that Ukrainian forces are responsible. But what is your perspective and the view from the ground of the women that you work with of how this war is going?
Russians regularly attack Ukrainian petroleum storage depots. They want to disrupt our sowing campaign and immobilize Ukrainian military equipment. 2 women are hiking on the road in Kiev region, and I pick up them. They said they stayed overnight in the garden because the mayor of the region said to plant the gardens. They were so fascinated that they forgot about their curfew, and one of them told, what else I can do? At the age of 82, my spouse and I'm not taken to the armed forces because of our age. So we get organized with our neighbors. We won't allow the Russians to organize a famine, so they will not be able to organize their hunger. Concerning the situation in Belgrade, the Russians should know that we will respond to their shelling and firing the missiles to Ukraine objects. And unlike Russians, Ukrainian soldiers don't bombing the civilian objects. The Ukrainian side doesn't officially confirm this blow at the oil depot in Belgrade. This is because not always if you can do something, you have to say that this is you. Actually, if I remember, 8 tanks with around 16,000 cubic meters of fuel burned down. The Russians' air defense didn't work, and our helicopter successfully returned to base after completing the test. This is the second strike in the Belgrade region, actually, and 2 days ago, the armed forces destroyed an ammunition depot near the city.
Yeah. Could I ask you one more question before I have to let you go very briefly? I know that the Ukrainian government said that men of a very broad age range had to stay and fight. Women and children could evacuate. The women who are involved in your group could evacuate. They could stay home. They could head for safer, relatively safer areas rather than stay on the front lines. Before I have to let you go, why is it so important to you and to them to be on the front lines rather than to fall back where it might be safer?
You know, I think everybody, woman and man who's like involved in this process and try to protect the country, they both have this feeling that they have no choice. And probably a lot of people can leave the country, even men now, they can leave country too. But it's like it don't depend to gender. I think everybody try to do their best because we want to be in our country. We want to save our borders. We want to be happy here. This is our land, and probably all of this war, this is like about our future. And I think everybody should stay here and protect. I'm okay with that. A lot of people gone and they wait for Ukraine, and that Ukraine will win and probably they will back. I'm sure. You should know that southern of Ukrainians back from abroad to Ukraine to fight, to organize volunteer movement and all of this stuff. And this is very important to future, not just Ukraine, to future of the world, because Russia is a real terroristic country.
Anna Kovalenko, I appreciate you making time with us. Stay safe as best you can, and thank you very much. Thank you. Lately, much of the world has been getting a crash course in Ukrainian geography. Kyiv, Mariupol, and Lviv are some of the cities we've been hearing a lot about. Well, we're going to take a closer look at Odessa. It's a strategic port city on the Black Sea. Tonight's feature report comes from NBC's Molly Hunter.
For weeks, this strategic port city has been at the ready, waiting anxiously on the brink. In the corner of the southwest coast, the city of a million is mostly Russian-speaking. Once a prominent feature of the Russian Empire, it's known as the Jewel of the Black Sea, and very much on Putin's wish list.
It is the strategic location. It is the biggest seaport. In this way, you control our trade, you can control our exports, you control our navy, the whole maritime domain. So you are controlling not only Odessa, you are controlling the whole coastal line, and even controlling a little bit of the NATO countries, Bulgaria and Romania, because it is so close. But Putin needs us to surrender, not to fight.
But this is not what surrender looks like.
So when you spent all this money, when you spent all these efforts, you created the myths, you need it paid back. So you need the city to surrender and to demonstrate that all people are happy to see the Russian soldiers.
But Odessa's not going to do that. Because I've talked to people in Odessa, I've talked to the Navy, and no one is going to...
Exactly. One of the reasons Odessa really like freedom. Yeah. Russian is everything except freedom. The Russians are destroying the part of the Russian culture by themselves. If you look what they're ruining and what we are the most afraid in Odessa, but not only here, they're ruining part of the Russian culture. They're ruining Russian Orthodox churches. We already have more than 50 being bombed in monasteries because they're ruining exactly what they are claiming that they are protecting.
At the center of the city, the famed Opera House has survived 2 world wars. Right now, it's one of the most heavily fortified buildings in the country. Lead choreographer Gary Savoyan says it's the heart and soul of Odessa.
What does it feel like when you walk into work into this building?
The building itself urges you to create, he says. The building has a great history. It's the best theater in the world, he says. His last performance was the night before the war started, February 23rd. It was the Nutcracker. But today, this is as close as we can get, like most downtown, now under military protection.
Now, we can't show you any of the military positions. We can't show you the checkpoints at almost every single intersection. What I can show you is the sandbags, the tires, the huge hedgehogs. This city is fortified in the historic city center, and they're ready for a fight.
We visited a defense training facility, part blacksmith, part boot camp, all volunteers. And they're making steel body armor to send to the front. Yuri says he has relatives inside Russia, like so many here in Odessa, but they've cut off communication.
You stopped talking to your relatives in Russia?
Yes, he says, because of the way they support their country. They have the internet, he says. Civilians here are learning basic weapons handling. Not many are up to the task of joining serious fighting forces, but they want to be able to defend their families if they need to. Igor last fought in the Russian army in Kazakhstan in the late 70s. After all these years, he says, he's starting from scratch. He never thought he'd have to pick up another gun. 31-year-old Diana is a pediatrician born and raised here in Odessa with little field experience.
So you're now training them?
Yes.
How to do basic field medical care?
I will shout at them and kill them all, she says. The entire city is now in defense mode. Known for its seaside resorts, many of the famed white sand beaches are now mined, according to officials here, ready for an amphibious attack.
Now, there are no civilians on this beach. Normally, it would be packed with people, but the Russians have blockaded the Odessa port, so we're not seeing any cargo ships coming in, nothing coming in or going out. If there is an attack on this strategic port, it's going to come from out there.
One of the highest-ranking Ukrainian naval officers on shore, Vladislav Nazarov, says the Russian warships off the coast move in and out. Psychological warfare. We will kill them, drown them, he says. They have no options.
So you don't think they can take Odessa? They're going to sink.
We will sink them, and it will be fish feeding season, and our fish will grow fat. Just down the beach, we met 77-year-old Ludmila Ivanovna. She was staring out at the waves. I can't understand their logic, she says. Do you?
I don't know.
She swims here every morning, usually starting now in April. Those are the optimists, she says, looking over at a group already in their swimsuits. We can't be afraid, but no one will ever forget this. But when exactly the Russians might launch an attack right here on central Odessa from the air or from the sea, no one here quite knows.
I believe that it can be even in 1 hour.
Nikolai Vakansky is running a volunteer hub. Until recently, it was a trendy food court.
And this used to be a bar?
It was a bar with oysters and champagne.
Or Aperol Spritz. And who are your volunteers? They all look like 25-year-olds, kind of young people who want to...
The people who used to eat here in the food market.
Are now volunteering here.
Yes.
So young,
hipsters, youngers.
But for Nick, like many here, descendants of previous waves of refugees, history is repeating itself.
I'm Jewish, for example. Yeah. So yes, this is like this is second time genocide in my family life. The first time they tried to kill us because we were Jewish. Now they want to kill us because we are Ukrainian. But we are strong, and everything will be okay.
Defiance runs throughout these streets, and below them, another vestige of World War's past. We head underground this bunker, a web of tunnels last used in World War II.
How deep we underground?
It's reopened now for those choosing to stay.
This is where you come during the air raid siren?
And it stretches back for about a mile, winding up at a secret nuclear bunker that Soviet secret police added in the 50s.
You have Wi-Fi and everything down here?
It's not fit for purpose, crumbling, molding, very humid. But this city remembers its history. Now, for those staying, an estimated half the city, they're fighting any way they can, doing everything they can to protect their heritage. Molly Hunter, NBC News, Odessa.
Up next, a bill to decriminalize marijuana is moving forward in Congress. We have the latest from Capitol Hill on what's in the bill and what it faces in the Senate. We have some breaking news tonight about actor Will Smith and the fallout from the slap at the Oscars. Tonight, he announced that he is resigning from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, which just awarded him one of its highest honors, the Oscar for Best Actor. In a statement released about an hour ago, he called his own actions, in his words, shocking, painful, and inexcusable. He admitted to hurting a lot of people, including Chris Rock and his family, and everyone watching. His statement reads in part, quote, I betrayed the trust of the Academy. I deprived other nominees and winners of their opportunity to celebrate and be celebrated for their extraordinary work. I am heartbroken. I want to put the focus back on those who deserve attention for their achievements and allow the Academy to get back to the incredible work it does to support creativity and artistry in film. So I am resigning from membership in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and will accept any further consequences the board deems appropriate, end quote. This is definitely not the way that he wanted to end the moment of winning Best Actor for playing Richard Williams in King Richard. Now, a separate statement from the Academy's president, David Rubin, says the group has accepted the resignation, but the disciplinary proceedings will continue. Legislation to legalize marijuana is on the move, including on Capitol Hill. New Mexico is now the 18th state to legalize recreational cannabis. This morning, dispensaries there opened for business. New Mexico now allows possession but not public use of marijuana. Meanwhile, in Washington, the House passed a bill that would legalize marijuana. Federal law currently restricts cannabis more tightly than opioids or fentanyl or cocaine or even meth. The House bill would eliminate penalties nationwide for manufacturing, distribution, or possession. It would also establish procedures for expunging convictions. NBC's Leanne Caldwell has more from Capitol Hill. Hey, Leanne.
Hi, Joshua. That's right. The Congress is one step closer to decriminalizing marijuana. But what they're doing, they're actually just catching up with what the states have already done. 39 states plus the District of Columbia have already legalized marijuana. 18 states plus D.C. have also allowed the use of medical marijuana. But this is a vote that was mostly partisan. Just 3 Republicans joined all Democrats, except for 2 Democrats, in support of it. And so this apparently is still a partisan issue up here in Washington, even though most people in the country support this. Now, the big thing about this is it not just decriminalizes it, what it also does is it expunges people's record who have been convicted of marijuana-related crimes. And that there is no date that starts. That means if someone was convicted of a marijuana crime 30, 35 years ago, they can apply to have their records expunged. So now what happens? It heads over to the Senate. There's a group of Senate Democrats who have been working on legislation that is very similar to the one in the House. They hope to have it released by, you guessed it, 4/20. I don't know if that's going to be the case, though. That's not that far away. They have not completed legislative text. But the big question is, will it pass? It will need the support of 60 senators, including at least 10 Republicans. It's unclear how many Democrats are going to support this. It's unclear how many Republicans are going to support this. But I will say there's a big libertarian component to this, and there are some Republicans who have already come out in support. But the question is that big number, 60. And so we'll see where this goes. But this is definitely, with a Democratic Congress, Democratic president, this is definitely the closest the country has come to decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level. Joshua.
Thank you, Leanne. That's NBC's Leanne Caldwell reporting from Capitol Hill. Up next, a huge scientific breakthrough, a complete sequence of the human genome. What does this massive accomplishment actually mean, and how was it done? The researcher who led the project joins us before we go. What makes you, you? Tonight, we have a much clearer picture of that. The first complete sequence of a human genetic code, a genome. Back in 2003, the National Institutes of Health created a generic genome from several people's DNA, but it was only 92% complete. It's taken 20 years to get that last 8%. Now, just in case biology was not your best subject, or perhaps you're taking it right now, here's a little more background. We are obviously talking about DNA. DNA is a molecule in your body. Now, when you think of DNA, you might think of this structure, the double helix. The language of DNA is written with 4 letters, A, T, G, and C. Each represents one of the base pairs that make up each strand. Your genome is all of your DNA. It's kind of like a complete user's guide for building and maintaining you. Half of your genome comes from your biological mother, the other half comes from your biological father, and it tells your body how to grow and how to work and how to repair itself. According to the NIH, the DNA in one single human cell would stretch out 6 feet long. And in those 6 feet would be a code that is 6 billion letters long. And it would look like this. This is just a small part of it. But now that we've read the whole thing, what have we learned? Joining us now is Karen Miga, an assistant professor of biomolecular engineering at UC Santa Cruz. She led the team of scientists behind the completed genome. Professor Miga, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this. All of the nerds on our team, which is basically everybody, we're super excited to hear more about this. I wonder if you could begin by just telling us what the challenge of reading that last 8% was. I presume it's not as simple as just unraveling the base pairs and going T, A, G. I'm guessing there's a little bit more to it than that.
Well, I really loved your intro when you emphasized how long DNA is. We just don't have the technology to read it end to end. So what scientists have to do is we have to take small pieces of our genome and reconstruct it into this final map. The challenge in the past is all people who put these puzzles together is that some parts of the puzzle are easy to put together and some parts are kind of like a blue sky to where the puzzle pieces look really similar to one another. Now, when the first human genome project was released, the puzzle pieces were really small. You're talking about opening a box and having something like 3,000 puzzles pieces to try to put together. Now we're in a new era where the puzzle pieces are quite big. And so we are the right technology, the right time, and the right team of scientists to really make this milestone in genomics and genetics.
Take us back to the moment where your team knew you had it, where you knew that victory was at hand and you had it right. How did you know and how did you feel?
Well, I mean, that moment of we had it, I don't know when we actually reached that, but I will give you one other moment. It was right before the pandemic. We had collected all of these pieces to try to put together beforehand. So we were in a very nice space to start to work as a team to put it all together. And one of the key researchers from Adam Phillippi's team at NIH had developed a new algorithm to try to put these pieces together. And what we saw from that first map were that all of our chromosomes, these are the parts of our genome that are organized into 46 sections, were forming their own connected groups. And we just stared at that map and knew for the first time that we could do this. And that was the moment we organized kind of a grassroots effort. This was an open, community-based effort during a pandemic. Hundreds of folks around the world really leaned in and contributed to this project of just putting the remaining pieces together and taking us to the finish line.
How much did the pandemic affect your work? Did it slow you down, or were you able to just kind of pivot and work through it in other ways?
If there's a silver lining to the pandemic, I think a lot of these researchers who are normally off giving talks in their labs had time to actually sit in front of their computer, work through these very complicated algorithms, and make sure that we could work cohesively on a team on all the standard platforms that your viewers are used to on Slack and Zoom to really make this happen. So I think in some ways the pandemic helped our team. It actually, I think many of our teammates were very excited to work on this project. So it was a sense of a positive part of the pandemic for us.
What are some of the things now that we have this complete genome that we can do? Are there certain areas of research or endeavor that are at the top of the list for researchers around the world, or anything in particular that you would like to see advanced research-wise now that this project is done?
Right. So I guess it's our hope that in the future, if a patient goes and sees a clinician and they have their entire genetic code in front of them, that they can start to connect the dots between what's wrong with that particular patient and the genetic sequence or the DNA in that tube. And we before did not have a complete picture, but now we do. And it's our hope that that will be the new complete and comprehensive way to do healthcare in the future. Now, I want to emphasize that all of the cells in our body divide. And every time that happens, this genome, all of the DNA in the cell, has to replicate and it has to divide equally. Otherwise, you can have cancers and other types of problems. The sequences that we are releasing to the public are those key sequences that are important to ensure that process works. They're called centromeres, We didn't have this information before. And now that we can see this part of our genome, we can start to ask what happens in these regions when there's an error that can cause cancer. It can cause different types of changes that happen early in development that can have a health outcome. My lab is very interested in these parts of the region, so that's something that I'm really tremendously excited about working on now.
Before I have to let you go, Professor, what made you decide to pursue this project? I'm sure it's a big scientific challenge, but what about the challenge appealed to you?
Well, since I was a graduate student, I've always been passionate about these corners of our genome that presented an unknown. I think this is part of, I guess, an excitement everyone has with the new discovery and finding something new. And here there are parts of our genome where we just did not have a map. And there are just simply more questions than answers. And that was exciting to me. And I can see, like I mentioned before, decades now of new discoveries. And it's all based on building this map. So that was a driver for me for about a decade of my research, was to team up with the right scientists to make sure that we could reach this milestone together.
UC Santa Cruz Assistant Professor Karen Miga, next time anybody wants to make fun of the banana slugs, just let them know that you guys have done some things that those other schools cannot do. Professor Miga, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Joshua.
Also making news tonight, Amazon now has its first employee union. Workers at an Amazon warehouse in New York City voted to unionize. The JFK 8 facility on Staten Island is Amazon's largest warehouse in New York. The National Labor Relations Board still needs to officially certify the results. Amazon has steadily pushed back on unionization efforts for years. In a statement, the company says it believes that, quote, having a direct relationship with the company is best for our employees, unquote. Meanwhile, employers in New York City will soon have to disclose salaries on job postings. Companies with 4 or more workers will post the minimum and maximum salaries for any job in town. That takes effect on May 15th. Now, that could take some of the guesswork out of negotiating pay, which can be hard enough. But we'd love to know how you have dealt with this. Share your story of negotiating the terms of your job. Pay, benefits, time off, and in this age of COVID, maybe working remotely. What worked for you? What do you wish you'd done differently? And what questions do you have about advocating for yourself? We will share your stories and questions with our experts next week. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. Or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. And finally tonight, the Final Four. It's the biggest weekend of the year for college basketball. The women's Final Four is underway. Tonight, South Carolina plays Louisville. Stanford plays UConn. The women's championship game is on Sunday. On the men's side, Villanova plays Kansas tomorrow night. And for the first time, Duke plays North Carolina in the NCAA tournament. And Duke maybe has an extra reason to play their best. It would be the ultimate going-away present for their head coach. Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K, is ending his career after 41 years at Duke. Courtside tickets for the farewell game are selling for as much as $18,000. The men's championship game is Monday night. We appreciate you making time for us tonight. And with that, your weekend may begin. Remember to send in your stories about advocating for yourself at work. And we also welcome more of your questions about the war in Ukraine. Those are always welcome, and we'll keep answering those in time. Please celebrate the Final Four safely this weekend. And Ramadan Mubarak to those of you who observe the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. That begins tomorrow at sundown. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us, and we'll see you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.